Let's talk about 2027. David Hundeyin, you've written recently about some of your frustrations with Peter Obi and his not so clear message about what he is going to do in 2027.
Obviously, with figures like Rotimi Amechi, former governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, former vice president Atiku Abubakar, Rabiu Kwankwaso, and Rauf Aregbesola, a few people like that. They appear to be coalescing. And then you have Peter Obi unseating an incumbent in Nigeria. It has only ever been done, 2015, and that the only reason it was an achievable thing then was that the entire opposition coalesced into one force behind one candidate. There was no split opposition at all. There was only one opposition in 2015. That's what made it even feasible or possible at all to take power from an incumbent. So in this situation, it looks as if there are indications that the coalition might not end up being the only significant opposition to run in the election. And the likely scenario in that case is that we basically have a rerun of 2023, where instead of a showdown between two actors, we have a three-way dogfight. And the incumbents end up winning almost by default, not because they won the election, but because the other two lost, which is what happened in 2023. If you look at the official figures announced by INEC, the APC received, I believe it was 36% of votes cast, which is a frankly dismal showing. But because the other two major opposition positions weren't able to come to an agreement before the election, so we ended up having a situation where the opposition scored close to 60% of the total votes in an election, which should have very comfortably put someone else in power. But because there was a split opposition, we've ended up maintaining the status quo. My concern is that could end up repeating itself in 2027. Peter Obi's position is that the coalition should back him. The coalition should give him the ticket to run in the presidential election. And the coalition's position is that he should run as a candidate in the coalition's primary elections. So again, we're stuck at this impasse where it looks as if we're going to end up going into the 2027 election and end up with three major candidates, two of them being opposition, and then we end up having a split opposition vote, and essentially the ruling party ends up remaining in power by default. Right. Which, from my perspective, is like the worst possible outcome. That's not an outcome that I would like to see. So the APC strategy now is the same as it's always been. And the strategy is basically to fragment and fracture any possible opposition as much as possible. So the idea is we don't necessarily have to win a 70, 80% landslide. We just need to make sure the other side doesn't win and remain in power by default. And how you do that is that you poach some key characters that could end up coalescing some more of the opposition around them. So you've mentioned some of those names. So it was kind of, bear in mind, these are the same characters who did the exact same thing that the current opposition is trying to do. They did that in 2015 successfully. They figured out how to fracture and fragment a political base and basically take advantage of that division for themselves. That's how you had entities like the NPDP forming out of the PDP in the run-up to 2015 and, all those shenanigans. So I guess they, experience is the best teacher, and they're simply reprising what they've always done, which is fracture and fragment the opposition and ensure that the opposition basically doesn't dedicate enough time to fighting the incumbents. They rather spend more time infighting and fighting each other. Realistically speaking, anytime there's an election between an incumbent and a challenger, it's essentially a referendum on the performance of the incumbent. For the electorate, it's a choice between more of the same, the so-called continuity, or a rejection of that status quo to try something new. The best case scenario for the opposition would be to unite and solidify itself behind a single candidate and make it a very simple choice for the electorate. This kind of election is supposed to be a referendum on the performance of the incumbents. in a sense, it will almost end up not mattering who Nigerians do or do not vote for if the opposition doesn't manage to get its act together and unite behind a single electoral force. Best case scenario would lie with Peter Obi himself. Um, and it would be a scenario where, regardless of whether he gets that presidential ticket or not, he's able to commit to work with the coalition, and he's able to relay that message to his support base that regardless of whether he gets that ticket or not, because I cannot stress this enough, there's absolutely no guarantee that if he were to run in the primaries, that he would win the ticket. Right. So this idea that it has to be a foregone conclusion that he has to get the ticket, unfortunately, is not an idea that I agree with. In as much as he's a candidate that I have a personal affinity for, I care about Nigeria significantly more than I care about him. And I think Nigeria needs a strong opposition now. So if he's able to relay to his voting base, to his support base, that everybody needs to collaborate, needs to work with the opposition regardless of who the candidate is, then best case scenario, we get to election day and it's a simple binary decision between the incumbents and the challengers. As I said, a simple referendum. Do you want APC to continue based on their record over the past 4 to 10 years, or 4 to 12 years, or do you want something different? That's the best case scenario. Now, the worst case scenario is that, first of all, there's no clarity in the short to medium term. We keep on sort of drifting closer and closer. The 2025 comes to an end. And then maybe sometime in February 2026, the coalition then finally holds its primaries. And then maybe shortly before the primaries, then Peter Obi decides that maybe he has seen indications that he's not going to win the ticket. And then he pulls out and he decides to run independently, which is what happened in 2022. And then we end up having this bitter, acrimonious intra-opposition civil war 1 year or 11 months to the election, which would be to the benefit of nobody else but the incumbents. And then we get to election day and we end up basically splitting the opposition's votes 2 or 3 ways. And then the incumbent ends up getting probably even an even lower vote share than they got in 2023. Maybe instead of 36%, maybe this time they get 29%, but it's still enough to push them over the line because the opposition basically ties itself up in several knots. So you have a Peter Obi, then you have a coalition, then you have another person, and then the opposition splits his votes 3 or 4 ways, which is a very feasible scenario, unfortunately.
Let's talk about INEC for a moment.
I think it's fair to say that INEC definitely has a big credibility question hanging over it. And I think this has always been true, but this is especially true going into 2027, especially given that the person who was the INEC chairman in the 2023 election cycle is still the chairman. So nothing functionally has changed materially. So that question mark definitely does hang over them. I think the bigger question mark than just the leadership of the INEC or its ability to conduct free and fair elections is also the political will of the current administration to even hypothetically create a situation for INEC to even have that possibility of carrying out a free and fair election. I think it's fair to say that based on the antecedents of the elements who are currently in power, I think that would be a very, very optimistic notion that they would knowingly and willingly create the conditions for them to potentially lose power. I don't think that's how these people operate. So I think it does have a whole number of questions hanging over it. And I think for these questions to be even remotely addressed or dispelled, maybe we're not going to be fortunate enough to see a revision of the Electoral Act like we did in run up to 2023. Maybe nothing significant is going to happen. But at the very least, there should be some signs. There should be, for example, the ongoing discourse about the registration of the so-called ADA party and the very clear sort of the gamesmanship being deployed should already make it clear that if the simple process of registering a political party, something which, if as long as the preconditions have been met, this thing shouldn't take 10 minutes, right? It's not a very big deal. And already that has become a national story that we're discussing on Trust TV. And it's just a simple registration of a political party. Then what happens then on election day, where you have much weightier matters to be decided? Who is in charge of making those decisions? These are issues which have not been resolved. I've spoken to people with knowledge, inside knowledge of INEC, and honestly speaking, it doesn't seem as if there is the slightest institutional ambition to change anything, to show anything different in 2027. If anything, it's looking as if there is appetite for things to get even worse. And to be fair to INEC, this isn't an internally driven thing. This is something that is coming from upstairs. I know it's called the Independent National Electoral Commission, but it's not really independent functionally speaking, because it's funding and then the appointment of certain key personnel are political decisions. And unfortunately, the people who hold that political power now are not in the slightest bit afraid to use that influence and wield it to sort of, influence the electoral process and things relating to the electoral process. So we're definitely going to have that question to answer, I think, in the run-up to the election and possibly even on election day itself. But I think we have to be realistic enough with ourselves to say that. But I've spoken to someone who has very intimate knowledge of, for example, the shenanigans that were deployed, the internal INEC shenanigans that were deployed during the most recent election that was conducted. I believe it was the Edo State election. And based on that case study, which is something that I'm going to be expanding on in the coming few weeks, I'm probably going to publish something on it as well. Based on that case study, if that template is deployed at a national level in 2027 election, then we're going to have a scenario where potentially whatever people actually thumbprint on the ballot paper isn't going to have any sort of an impact on the result that is announced, because based on based on the information this person provided to me, the internal players, obviously on the instigation of political power, the internal players have figured out a way to effectively game this new electoral system that has been deployed with the IREV and the BVAS, these things that were supposed to be fail-safes and technologically foolproof. The internal players have figured out how to game these things, how to rig these things, and make it such that the numbers that have been predetermined or pre-allocated to candidates can be inputted and then made to appear as though these are the actual figures coming out of the electoral process. Meanwhile, they were not. And what really alarmed me about it is that this is not a very high-tech thing. This is not it's not about hacking machines or anything like that. This is a sort of biro and paper process, because despite the technology that has been deployed into the electoral process, there's still some sort of weak points between the what's it called, the polling units and the so-called collation centers. Within the collation centers, there are certain points where data needs to be recorded on paper, and at those points, it is the easiest thing in the world to simply swap out certain things, and then the sort of the data that could be used hypothetically in an electoral tribunal to compare from what is recorded electronically to what is recorded on the paper, for you to show that there's a discrepancy. Even that data, there's a way to rig it as well, such that it appears as though what was recorded electronically and what appears on the paper are the same, right? That is the scenario that we have. So, and the person who provided this information is an active internal player, right? This is not an outsider. This is not gist, right? This is not gossip. This is internal information. So if that has been deployed successfully in the Edo State election, I see no reason why it will not be deployed at federal level and across many other state elections in 2027. So where hypothetically we can end up in a scenario where the ruling structure effectively awards itself a nationwide landslide that did not happen. So I think, which is why it's important that on platforms like this, the topic is raised now, the alarm is raised now, and I'm going to do my part to raise the alarm in the coming few weeks that the electoral process is not by any means foolproof, that the technology that has been deployed has actually, the people have found a way to actually completely end run it, to completely get around it, and that those points of weakness need to be addressed for us to even claim to have what we refer to as an election.
They are planning for rigging on election day, but do you know what? They are taking it beyond that. They are planning for rigging leading to election day. Do you know that there is a type of rigging that takes place before election day even comes? That is where you have weaponized poverty, weaponized impunity, weaponized political party. These are tools to rig election before the election even starts. And the whole aim of these weaponized political parties, weaponized impunity, weaponized poverty, the whole aim is voter apathy. Such that the only few viewers that come out, voters that come out to vote, they are buyable. So they are using these tools to prime Nigerians for voter apathy and for vote selling and vote buying. So we cannot just focus on only election day and say we have done the job. No, we've done the job for election day, where Camp Guard and Election Watch, they take care of rigging on election day. But you see, Well Fund, Law Patrol, and Abundance Party, they take care of rigging leading up to the election day. And we must take both of them together to completely eradicate rigging in 2027. Well Fund is a tool to de-weaponize poverty in Nigeria. It is a scheme that helps Nigerians to fish, not simply give them fish. You've heard it. Give a person fish, you feed him for the moment. The next moment he's hungry, there's nothing you can do because you don't have infinite resources. But teach him to fish, you have fed him for life. Now, if you take it further and you help him to fish, you have fed a whole country. That is exactly what Well Fund seeks to do. Financial support for feeding in exchange for participation in agricultural food production. Well Fund will not only empower Nigerians, put food on their table, it will reduce the cost of food and increase our hard currency earning from food, because food will be surplus within a very short time with Well Fund. And when you have a people that are empowered, they won't sell their vote for 500 naira or 1,000 because they know from Well Fund they get way more than that. So Well Fund will help to de-weaponize poverty. Weaponized impunity will be handled by Law Patrol. Law Patrol will take care of weaponized impunity leading up to the 2027 election. And then Abundance Party is the tool to de-weaponize political parties. Right now, political parties have been weaponized. Even if you look at the so-called coalition right now, it is the same recycled old politicians that are forming this coalition. Yes, I will be okay with it if somebody like a Peter Obi can emerge as a presidential candidate, but it only takes care of the presidency. What about those at the National Assembly, those in the state, those in the local government? The political parties as they currently exist in Nigeria have been weaponized against credible candidates. No credible candidate with integrity and capacity and character will participate in politics as it is practiced by political parties in Nigeria today. No credible candidate will do it. Only those who, and they are very few. In fact, Very rare, like Peter Obi, very rare. How many of you Nigerians can take 100 million naira to go and buy form to become president of Nigeria? Well, now why even see the 100 million? How many Nigerians have 100 million naira today? And it's not only 100 million naira. 100 million is just for form. There's expression of interest too. Then you now talk about money to buy delegates. After money to buy delegates, you will have to settle some bills for the political parties. They go knock you bill. And after that, you have to now start thinking about how you are going to spend money on some people at INEC, spend money on some people in the security agency, spend money on some people to buy votes and all that. Before you know it, to become president, you are looking at 20 billion naira. Number one, how many Nigerians can afford that? And in any case, why would you think that somebody will spend 20 billion naira to become president and then the person will come and care about you? When his official legitimate salary is not up to even 100 million or 1 billion. He must steal. So the political parties as they currently exist have been weaponized against Nigerians. So we must de-weaponize political party, and a tool to do that is the Abundance Party of Nigeria. These are the tools. But the one that is very critical right now is the election day solution to stop rigging. And that's Election Watch, which needs you to volunteer to become a polling unit marshal. It's at no risk to you. I know many of you are afraid. Yes, you don't want a situation whereby you talk and then they come and remove the food from your table. I can understand that. But this does not put you at risk. You are not at risk of being shot. You are not at risk of losing your source of livelihood. No risk to you. But at the end of the day, you stand to benefit from a Nigeria that works, where you will be able to earn much more than you are earning today. So no risk. There is 100% anonymity when you volunteer as a polling unit marshal. 100% safe. But the impact of your action will be felt years to come, because it will birth a new Nigeria that works for all of us. Join us to accomplish this task. The links are in the description. We are testing it right now. Help us to test it.